The story begins on Luoqing Pedestrian Street, March 2nd, 2030. The streets are bright and bustling, filled with tall buildings covered in colorful signs. Inside a dimly lit office, a man's voice breaks the silence. He asks a question with a sharp tone. "Kid, do you know what it means to borrow 5 million yuan from me?" A plant glows faintly under the light, while in the background, several men sit around a table. One of them, Zhang Yang, the boss of the Dahal gang and an underground money lender in Luocheng, leans back in his chair. He smirks, explaining that his interest rates are quite high. Lighting a cigarette, he takes a slow drag before continuing. Smoke rises as his eyes narrow with amusement. Across from him sits a nervous young man, trembling as sweat runs down his face. Two large bodyguards stand behind him, their shadows falling over his chair. Trying to sound confident despite his fear, he tells Brother Zhang that as long as he is willing to lend him the money, the interest rate can be as high as needed. Zhang Yang leans forward, resting his chin on his hands. His tone turns calm, yet dangerous. He says, "All right," and tells the boy that it will be 4% daily interest, that he will lend him 5 million, and he must pay back 7 million half a year later. He also tells the boy to write an IOU for 7 million first. Then Zhang Yang's eyes glint coldly as he adds that at the same time, he must provide collateral of equal value. The young man trembles as he nervously holds out a document, his voice shaking as he speaks, telling Brother Zhang that it is his house's property deed and asking him to take a look. Zhang Yang takes the paper and examines it with a faint smile, commenting that the house is a bit old now and worth only about 3 to 4 million yuan at most. In his mind, he scoffs, thinking how foolish it is for someone to use a large, flat apartment over 140 square meters for a high-interest loan. To him, it is like a sheep willingly walking into a wolf's den. Leaning back in his chair, Zhang Yang says with a smirk that the young man, named Chun, cannot borrow 5 million with just that house, and he tells him plainly that the deal can't be done. Panicked, the young man clasps his hands together and pleads, begging Brother Zhang not to refuse him, saying that even 4 million yuan would be enough. He tries to sound confident, claiming he has consulted a master who said his luck is good recently and that he would earn the money back several times over soon. Zhang Yang relaxes in his chair, resting his arms behind his head. He says he can only lend 3.5 million yuan, claiming that any more and he would lose money. Inside, he sneers to himself, thinking that the young man is nothing but a gambling fool despite his age, and now he has him completely under his control. The young man's expression brightens instantly. He thanks Brother Zhang over and over, promising that he will repay the money quickly. Zhang Yang leans forward with a cold smile, resting his chin on his clasped hands. He tells the young man that since he has agreed to the terms, he must pay back 4.9 million yuan within 3 months, and if he fails to do so, his house will be taken as collateral. Then, in a calm tone, he adds that if there is no problem, the young man only needs to write the IOU and the funds will be released within 3 days. The young man nods nervously, glancing down at the paper in his hands. He says there is no problem, but hesitates for a moment before adding that he has one condition. Zhang Yang raises an eyebrow, intrigued, and leans in slightly, asking what it is. 10 minutes later, the deal is done. Outside the building, the young man steps out smiling, clutching his documents. One of Zhang Yang's men stands by the door, seeing him off with a polite tone, saying, "Thank you for your patronage. Brother Chun, take care." The young man looks at his phone and sees a message appear on the screen. His mobile account has received 3.5 million yuan. Relief and excitement flash in his eyes. After confirming the money, the young man smiles and calls Zhang Yang an idiot. His expression darkens as his eyes glow with a faint red light, and a cold smile creeps across his face. He whispers to himself that the apocalypse will descend in 1 month, and when that happens, who would be left to repay this useless loan? With the money now in his hands, he vows to prepare well this time. He does not intend to live the same miserable life he lived in his previous one. In his previous life, a catastrophic natural disaster had struck the blue star. It was a terrifying event that completely altered the planet's ecosystem. The sun unleashed a surge of violent solar radiation, and the Earth was engulfed in searing light. The global temperature soared to nearly 50 degrees Celsius, turning the world into a blazing inferno. Under the burning skies, humanity was plunged into chaos. A 30-day high-temperature apocalypse began. Cities melted, The ground cracked, and the once living world became a wasteland of fire. In the ruins, even the animals turned feral. A black wolf with glowing red eyes nosed hungrily at the remains of a scorched human arm. Meanwhile, back in the present, Zhang Yang laughed loudly in his office, holding the signed contract. He couldn't believe how easily the young man had agreed to raise the interest rate just to get the money faster. His laughter echoed as he mocked, saying that gambling dogs like him didn't deserve a house anyway. One of his subordinates approached him, looking puzzled. The man hesitated before speaking, pointing out that the young man's house was worth over 4 million, yet he had accepted only 3.5 million without hesitation. The subordinate frowned and asked if there might be some kind of trick behind it. But Zhang Yang leaned back in his chair with a sly grin, his eyes gleaming under the dim light. He told his subordinate not to worry, saying he had seen plenty of gambling addicts before. People so desperate they would sell their own families for money, and compared to that, one house meant nothing. With a calculating tone, he ordered his man to contact the casino and rig the gambling results. When the time came, not only would they claim the house, but they also wouldn't let the borrower escape. He told him to sell anything valuable the man owned. The subordinate nodded eagerly and replied that he understood. The scene shifted to the city's skyline, glowing under the setting sun, where the tall HK Mall building stood against the horizon. The young man walked alone down the street, the orange light reflecting off his hoodie. He glanced at his phone and smirked. He thought to himself that there were still many good people in the world, that all it took was a small increase in interest rates for that fool to hand over the money immediately. He chuckled softly, wondering if the man truly believed he could outsmart him. Calling the loan shark an old fool, he reminded himself that he had borrowed high-interest loans from every lender in Luocheng within a single day. He scoffed at the thought, confident that a mere rate hike meant nothing to him. As his eyes glowed faintly red, his smirk deepened. He declared that once the money was in his hands, no one should dream of ever getting it back. Then his thoughts darkened as memories of his previous life resurfaced. The earth drying up, vegetation dying, and living creatures mutating. Civilization had crumbled, and humanity descended into chaos. Resources became scarce, forcing people to abandon morality, doing whatever it took just to survive. As the world descended into chaos, possessing resources became equivalent to possessing supreme wealth. Resources had become so scarce that people resorted to ruthless and violent means just to secure a small amount of survival materials. Even former billionaires and once famous stars were reduced to beggars. They had to kneel and plead for something as small as a sausage or a single cup of water. Those who couldn't secure resources were left to wander the streets aimlessly, eventually meeting a miserable death in the wastelands of the fallen world. But now everything was different. The young man had been reborn. He still had time before the disaster struck, enough time to prepare in advance, to seize what he needed before the world burned again. He lowered his hand, touching his face as a chilling smile formed. His eyes glimmered with cold determination, and faint sparks of red flickered around him. Moments later, while walking through the city, he heard laughter from a nearby cafe. He turned his head slightly, his sharp gaze shifting toward the sound. Inside a brightly lit dessert shop, two women chatted excitedly near the counter. Chen immediately remembered that this was the shop that carried the legendary Shugo Assassin, a luxury ice cream said to be even more expensive than Häagen-Dazs, known as the noble among ice creams. Seeing this, the young man's gaze sharpened. His expression turned serious as he looked toward the counter, a flicker of recognition crossing his eyes. Memories from his past life surfaced. He remembered how he had always been reluctant to buy that extravagant treat for himself, yet he had purchased it multiple times for Lu Wanqing. He clenched his jaw, thinking bitterly that giving such an expensive dessert to her had been a greater waste than feeding it to a dog. The more he thought about it, the more frustration boiled inside him. His heart ached with regret, and he suddenly burst out, declaring that he would enjoy it himself this time. Charging toward the counter with determined steps, he slammed his hand down and spoke loudly to the staff, his tone confident and unrestrained. He asked for 10 of every flavor of ice cream available in the shop. Hearing that, the people around him gasped in surprise. One of the women exclaimed in disbelief, wondering if he could really afford that much. Another, eyes wide, whispered that the way he made the order looked incredibly cool. Meanwhile, The young man stood calmly with one hand against his chin, thinking to himself, this time he would indulge in everything he had once denied himself. The shop attendant looked startled as she hesitated behind the counter. She stared at the young man in disbelief, thinking that although he was handsome, he didn't look rich at all. Her voice trembled slightly as she asked if he was serious about his order. Trying to confirm, she explained that their shop only sold high-end ice cream, and that 10 of each flavor would cost more than 20,000 yuan. She asked again, unsure if he really wanted to proceed. Nearby, a woman with long red hair sneered after overhearing the conversation. With a mocking smile, she said that someone like him dressed so plainly couldn't possibly afford such luxury. She laughed arrogantly and added that if he truly managed to pay for it, she would kowtow to him in public. The young man's eyes narrowed as he turned toward her, his tone calm but sharp. He asked if the words she had just said were true. The woman's smile faltered, her expression turning defensive. She snapped back, asking if he really expected her to bow to him, demanding to know what kind of person he thought he was to act so arrogantly. But the young man only smirked, his expression turning cold and confident. He told her that he was offering her a way out, but since she insisted on provoking him, she would definitely end up kowtowing. His voice lowered as he added with chilling certainty that not even God could stop it now. He had already spoken it into existence. The woman's face twisted in anger as she shouted at him, but the young man only smiled faintly, unfazed by her outburst. Turning toward the counter, he calmly instructed the shop attendant to pack all the ice cream in the store, saying that he would take everything. As the staff hesitated, he pulled out his phone and displayed his account balance, a staggering 20 million yuan. The woman's confident expression froze instantly, while the attendant's eyes widened in shock. Trembling, she stammered that she needed to confirm with her manager and quickly hurried away. Moments later, the store manager arrived, bowing politely. He introduced himself as Fei Qi and asked what Mr. Chen required. The young man looked relaxed, his tone composed as he told the manager to calculate the total price of all the ice cream in the store, and added casually that they wouldn't need to open for business today. Hearing this, Manager Fei blinked in disbelief, but quickly nodded with a respectful smile. He told the young man to wait for a moment as he checked the inventory. Secretly astonished, he muttered to himself, wondering what kind of big shot would buy up an entire month's sales revenue in one go. He thought about how few people ever purchase such expensive ice cream. Most customers only came to admire it. After a brief calculation, the manager returned and announced that the merchandise currently on display was worth 70,000 yuan, while the total stock, including the inventory, was around 1 million yuan. Hearing this, the young man smirked slightly. He thought to himself that it wasn't all that expensive after all. Since the apocalypse was coming anyway, he might as well empty their entire stock. If the world ended, he could simply sit at home and enjoy his ice cream in peace. Chun calmly told the manager that he would transfer a deposit of 300,000 yuan first and instructed him to deliver all the ice cream from their inventory to his address as soon as possible. The manager's eyes widened in surprise, but quickly turned into excitement. He eagerly nodded and assured Chun that everything would be handled right away, calling him Brother Chun with sudden respect. With a slight smile, Chun turned toward the group of women standing nearby. His voice was calm, but confident as he said they could choose any ice cream they liked from the store. Everything was on him. The women gasped in shock. One of them exclaimed happily that Chun was paying for it all, while another blurted out in disbelief at how rich he was. Their faces lit up with excitement as they admired him, whispering that he looked even more handsome now. Chun stood tall with a relaxed grin, his arms open in a confident gesture. Then his expression shifted slightly as he turned his gaze toward the red-haired woman who had mocked him earlier. His tone turned sharp as he reminded her that his offer excluded her, that he was still waiting for her to keep her word and kowtow to him. The woman froze, her confidence vanishing. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but only managed to stammer weakly. Moments later, unable to bear the humiliation, she dropped to her knees before him, bowing her head low to the ground. Chun looked down at her with a calm smile, standing tall and composed as the others stared in stunned silence. The scene then shifted to a peaceful view of a riverside lined with cherry blossom trees, petals drifting gently through the air under the glow of a warm sunset. Chin sat on a wooden bench, holding a popsicle in one hand and taking a bite with a relaxed smile. He nodded to himself and commented that the ice cream, fittingly named Assassin, truly lived up to its reputation. Its taste and texture were exceptional. As he leaned back, he muttered softly while eating, but midway through his words, he lifted his hand. A sudden surge of blue light appeared, twisting the air in front of him. A dark, square-shaped portal shimmered into existence, surrounded by glowing energy lines. Chin explained to himself that his ability could keep anything inside it perfectly preserved, allowing him to enjoy fresh ice cream anytime he wanted. He smiled, amused by the thought, and casually flicked a small blue bag into the glowing portal. With a confident tone, he said that with this power, inviting over any star or young model wouldn't be a problem. Just thinking about it made him feel excited. Chin raised his hand as a black, glowing square appeared before him. He looked at it thoughtfully, his voice calm as he said that he hadn't expected his ability to be reborn along with him. He recalled that in his previous life, abilities had only started awakening gradually after the apocalypse began. A faint smile appeared on his lips as he gazed at the mysterious power hovering above his palm. He admitted that he didn't fully understand how it worked, but he knew one thing for certain. This would become his greatest trump card in the days to come. He then sat back down on the bench under the cherry blossoms, petals drifting around him as the evening light glowed softly. In a quiet tone, he said that it was time to start preparing for what lay ahead, building a safe house, setting up cold storage, gathering weapons, and securing an energy reserve. With a small sigh, he muttered that he still had a lot to do. Just then, his phone suddenly chimed with a ringtone announcing, "Little Fairy is calling." Chin blinked in surprise and turned his head slightly. He pulled out his phone and frowned when he saw the name flashing on the screen, Lu Wanqing. His expression darkened as he muttered that it was her again, calling it bad luck. Chin paused when he saw the name Lu Wanqing glowing faintly in the darkness. After Chin's parents passed away, Lu Wanqing appeared in his life like a savior. In his grief and loneliness, he saw her as a source of warmth and light, someone who reached out a helping hand when the world felt empty. Back then, he was too naive to realize her true intentions. To him, she seemed like the light that had entered his dark world. But in reality, what she was after wasn't him. It was the inheritance his parents had left behind. Their relationship soon became one built on lies and manipulation. Chin remembered her sitting close to him, whispering softly that her mother insisted on certain conditions if he truly wanted to marry her. She told him that the large, fully paid apartment in the city center had to be written under her name, along with a bride price of 880,000 yuan. He complied, blinded by love. Yet it felt like falling into a bottomless pit. She kept asking for more, reaching again and again until all his savings were drained. Even that wasn't enough. She began pushing him to sell his ancestral home just so she could have another luxury apartment in the city. When he hesitated, her tone turned manipulative, saying it was for their future, that his old family house wasn't worth keeping anyway. Then, Chin's memories darkened. He remembered being forced down, humiliated, and helpless as greed consumed her. Later, she stood beside another man in a dark room, smiling coldly as she introduced Chun like an object. She told the man, whom she addressed as young master, that Chun was the one she had mentioned before, the one who perfectly met the man's special material requirements. At that moment, Chin finally understood. The woman he once thought of as his savior had sold him out for her own gain. Chin's eyes burned with fury as memories of his past life resurfaced. When the apocalypse descended, chaos consumed the world. He had risked everything, his safety, his future, to protect Lu Wanqing. But in the end, she betrayed him without hesitation. To cling to someone stronger, she had sold him off like livestock. He remembered the cold floor, the smell of blood, and the shadow looming over him. His body trembled as the figure above observed him with detached curiosity, muttering that there was nothing particularly special about him. Then the man wondered aloud if he needed to eat him to see any real result. Chin's fate back then had been cruel beyond words. His voice echoed bitterly in his thoughts. In the end, he hadn't even been left with a complete corpse. Now, standing under the pale light with red eyes glowing faintly, Chin held his phone tightly, his expression dark yet calm. A sinister smile curved across his lips as he looked at the name on the screen. He whispered coldly that since Lu Wanqing had run right into him again, It was time to properly settle the score. The scene shifted to a tall, luxurious building glimmering under the golden sunset, a high-end hotel. Inside, the sound of soft footsteps echoed across the floor. It was Lu Wanqing. Chen answered the call and asked gently if she had called him and whether something was the matter. Inside a brightly lit bathroom, Lu Wanqing stood in front of the mirror, her hair wrapped in a towel, a silk robe loosely tied around her. Speaking sweetly into her phone, she told Chen on the other end that she had been out playing with friends and had accidentally lost a gold necklace she really loved. She sighed dramatically, saying how heartbroken she felt about it. On the other side of the call, Chen's voice came through, calm yet laced with an unsettling tone. He spoke softly, asking what else he could possibly do. "Of course," he said, "I will buy my dearest darling a new one." His voice deepened into a faintly mocking tone as he added that one wasn't enough. She could buy 10 and wear them alternately if she wished. Hearing that, Lu Wanqing blinked in surprise at his sudden generosity. Her expression softened slightly, curiosity mixing with disbelief. She asked when he had suddenly become so generous. Calmly, Chen told her he had been lucky lately, that he had invested a bit in virtual currency and made a small profit. "Of course," he added smoothly, "when I earn money, I have to spend it on my darling." Hearing that, suspicion flashed across her face. She asked if he had fallen for some kind of scam, mentioning that virtual currencies were infamous for being unreliable. Chen's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He replied that whether it was a scam or not didn't matter. What mattered was whether he could make money in the next round. He said that small games were boring, and this time he planned to play big. Then his tone shifted subtly, becoming more serious. He mentioned that he was preparing to borrow a large amount of capital to invest even more. The loan, he explained, required a witness. Speaking with a dark smile forming on his face, he asked her to help him out, promising that once the deal was done, he would give her 5% of the loan amount as payment for her hard work. While Lu Wanqing stood in her bathrobe, hearing Chen's plan, a man's voice suddenly questioned her from nearby. He asked why she was taking so long, wondering what was making her drag her feet. Lu Wanqing immediately hid her phone and turned toward the man with a composed expression. She quickly smiled, stepping closer with a playful tone. Wrapping her arm around him, she called him honey, telling him sweetly that she would be ready soon and asking him to wait for her. As she leaned against the older man, her eyes glimmered with calculation. Inwardly, she thought about how spending one night with this old man only earned her 5,000. Yet, Chen's offer, for signing a document, would give her 50,000. To her, it seemed like an easy choice. She dismissed any thought of risk, reasoning that it was only a signature. Besides, she believed Chen was too much of a coward to dare deceive her. A moment later, the call between them ended. Chen looked down at his phone screen, which displayed "call ended." A faint, dark smile spread across his face as his crimson eyes glowed with determination. He whispered coldly to himself that he would wait for Lu Wanqing. As the scene shifted to a tall building bathed in evening light, Chen's voice continued in the background. He said quietly that it was now time to build his fortress. He met an architect and, with a commanding tone, pointed to the building site and ordered that within 1 month, he wanted the place transformed into an impenetrable fortress. Chen stood in front of the building, his eyes sharp as he began listing out detailed construction plans. He explained that the windows would need to be made of bulletproof composite glass with invisible anti-theft mesh, and the walls reinforced into 3-meter-thick bulletproof exteriors. The entire structure needed to withstand earthquakes with a resistance rating of 8 or higher. He pointed upward, his expression confident, adding that the roof would be completely paved with solar panels and have an independent power generation system to maintain air quality. It would also include an air purification and filtration system to block any external toxic gases. The architect standing before him, a man in glasses holding a laptop, began nervously reading from his notes. He explained that the fortress would include an independent ecological system capable of supplying 72 hours of oxygen and water circulation. It would also have explosion-proof doors, and the entry would require dual verification, both biometric recognition and a mechanical lock. Chen's voice grew firm as he summarized the plan, declaring that within 1 month, the entire building must be rebuilt into an impact-resistant fortress equipped with a complete life support system. The architect stared at him, stunned by the absurd request. His thoughts raced as he wondered if Chun was some sort of doomsday prepper or just delusional from watching too many sci-fi movies. Chun narrowed his eyes, stepping closer and asking if the architect couldn't handle the job. He reminded him that his resume claimed he was a defense master who had designed bunkers for top billionaires. The man stammered nervously, adjusting his glasses as sweat ran down his temple. He admitted that Mr. Chin's requirements were indeed unique and of extremely high quality, but hesitated, mentioning that the main issue would be the budget. The architect pushed his glasses up, a sly grin spreading across his face as he thought to himself that Chun was just another rich fool brainwashed by doomsday theories, someone with too much money burning a hole in his pocket. But his expression shifted dramatically the moment Chun showed him the transfer confirmation on his phone. His eyes widened, and he almost stumbled backward in shock. Chun had already deposited 1 million as a down payment, saying calmly that the final payment could be named by the architect himself. Hearing that, the architect froze for a second, then burst with excitement. He shouted that the final payment would be whatever price he chose. Inwardly, he was overjoyed, thinking he had struck gold. He couldn't believe his luck. One job with this rich idiot, and he could achieve financial freedom. Chun, however, smiled with quiet confidence and reminded him that while he didn't care about the price, he did care about the quality of the work. He warned the architect to make sure the final inspection passed, because he valued solid materials and precision above all else. The two men leaned forward, shaking hands with forced smiles. The air between them felt like a clash of opposing flames, Chin's aura burning with fiery determination, while the architect's greed gleamed cold and sharp. Inwardly, the architect had his own plan. He decided to fleece Chin for all he was worth. Meanwhile, Chin thought to himself that he was going to make full use of this man's skills, laughing silently that once the apocalypse hit, the architect would have no way of finding him for the final payment. Later that night, Chin sat deep in thought. He said that with the fortress plan secured, the next step was gathering supplies, medicine, food, and daily necessities. Those were easy to handle, but there was something else that worried him more. Chin's mind echoed with a grim realization. He thought to himself that the most dangerous thing during the apocalypse wouldn't be natural disasters, but human nature itself once order was gone. In his vision, chaos and violence flashed before him. A monstrous shadow loomed with glowing red eyes, representing humanity's cruelty when laws collapsed. He muttered that cold weapons could easily be bought from hardware stores, but firearms, the kind capable of delivering a fatal blow, were much harder to obtain. Later that day, Chin walked alone through the quiet city streets. Checking his phone with a focused look, a message appeared from an unknown contact. It read, "Firearms source, secretive channels. Not what you can't think of, but what you can't find. Honest transaction, safety first." He quickly typed a reply asking, "How to buy?" Moments later, another message appeared on his screen saying they would send him the address via private message, 8 p.m. tonight. No waiting for latecomers. That night, Chin walked through the dimly lit streets toward the meeting place. The air was cold, and the road was empty except for the faint glow of streetlights. He murmured to himself, wondering how much the seller wanted and where they should meet. Just as he continued walking under the blue streetlight, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed behind him. Several figures were approaching fast. A woman sprinted through the dark alley, her breathing heavy and desperate. Behind her, several men were in pursuit, shouting angrily for her to stop. Their voices echoed through the narrow streets as they hurled insults, demanding that she halt and calling her names. The woman's eyes were filled with fear, but she kept running without looking back. Her long hair whipped behind her as the sound of footsteps grew louder. But before they could catch up, the woman suddenly collided with someone standing at the corner. It was Chun. She immediately hid behind him. One of the men yelled again, his tone filled with rage, mocking her for trying to escape. "Keep running then," he shouted before sneering. "You think you can cheat in my territory? You must be tired of living." Without hesitation, she clung to Chen's arm, trembling as she pleaded, asking him to please save her. Chun turned his head sharply, his expression shifting from confusion to shock when he saw her face clearly. Recognition flashed in his eyes. He muttered in disbelief, his heart pounding. "Is that her, Liu? How is she in a place like this?" Under the cold blue glow of a streetlight, a group of thugs surrounded Liu. One of them held her firmly by the arm, while another swung a metal bat, pointing it threateningly toward Chun, who stood a few steps away. The gang leader, a man with blonde-streaked hair, glared furiously and shouted orders. Lu Yu struggled desperately, her voice trembling as she cried out, her hair disheveled and her face twisted in pain. Seeing this, Chin's eyes darkened, and he muttered her name under his breath. Lu Yu. Memories flickered through Chin's mind. Images of their school days resurfaced. He remembered her clearly, the academic goddess from middle school, the girl countless boys had admired from afar. Back then, she was bright, confident, and full of promise. Now, standing before him, she was a shadow of that memory, bruised, trembling, and pleading for help. Chin's jaw tightened, his gaze cold and focused. The tension in the alley thickened. It was clear that he was no longer just a bystander. His expression hardened as he listened to the thug gripping her hair shout in rage, demanding that she hand over the money. Otherwise, the man growled, yanking her head back. Don't even think about leaving. One of the thugs, a man with blonde-streaked hair, sneered with a twisted grin as he spoke to his bald companion. He suggested that there was no point in wasting time talking. If the woman couldn't pay, he said mockingly, she could simply pay with her body. His tone was filled with cruelty and amusement. Before they could act further, a calm but firm voice cut through the night. Chin stepped forward, his expression cold and his presence commanding. A faint green light shimmered around him as he told them to let her go. The men turned, startled by the interruption. The woman's captor hesitated, still gripping her by the hair, while the others exchanged glances. The leader frowned, irritation flashing across his face, and shouted angrily, "Where did this reckless kid come from? Trying to play the hero in front of me? I'll cripple you first." He lunged forward with fury, his fists swinging toward Chun with deadly intent. But in that instant, Chin's eyes narrowed, a chilling red gleam flashing in his gaze. In a blur of motion, Chun moved faster than the thug could react. His body turned sharply, and before the attacker could finish his swing, Chun dodged and got into a perfect position to counterattack. Chin's hand shot out, grabbing the attacker's wrist mid-swing. A sharp crack echoed through the alley, halting the assault in an instant. The bald man screamed in agony, shouting that his hand was broken. Before he could react further, Chin's expression turned cold. His red eyes glowed faintly as he lunged forward with terrifying speed. His fist struck the man squarely, sending him flying backward and crashing into the ground. Just as the alley fell silent, a glowing blue system window appeared before Chun, displaying detection of intense negative emotions. Fear plus severe pain plus anger. A moment later, another notification flickered. Negative emotion harvesting system has activated successfully. Chen stood amidst the swirling smoke, a faint smile crossing his lips as he reacted with surprise. He realized that this strange system hadn't existed in his previous life. Suddenly, one of the thugs grabbed the silver-haired woman, pulling her close and pressing a weapon to her neck. With a crazed expression, he shouted for Chen not to move, threatening to kill her if he did. Before Chun could react, a man suddenly appeared and threw a brick directly at the thug. The brick slammed into the man's face, sending him flying backward as he smashed through debris, bricks and dust scattering through the air. The woman gasped in shock, barely believing what she had seen. The remaining two thugs froze, their eyes widening in horror as a heavy block of debris landed right beside them, making them flinch in fear. Just then, a new figure appeared at the end of the alley. He stepped forward with a cocky grin and mocked the scene, saying it was shameful for a group of grown men to gang up on a single girl. Enraged by the taunt, one of the bald thugs raised his bat, charging forward furiously while shouting that they were asking for death. The thugs rushed in, swinging their weapons recklessly. Chen moved first, his expression calm but sharp. With a swift motion, he deflected one attack, his hand striking with precise force. At the same time, the new boy launched a powerful kick, sending another thug flying backward. The alley echoed with heavy impacts as bodies hit the ground one after another. Chin's eyes glowed faintly red, his movements too fast for the eye to follow. In an instant, he appeared in front of another thug and delivered a clean, devastating punch that sent the man reeling. Working in perfect sync, both men struck at the same time. Chin's fist slammed into one attacker's jaw, while his companion's kick sent another crashing onto the pavement. As the last remaining thug staggered, Chin clicked his tongue in mild annoyance before finishing him with a single decisive blow. The man collapsed to the ground, gasping in pain as Chen's foot pressed down on his chest, leaving the entire street silent. Chun and the new boy stood tall under the streetlights, their feet pressing down on the fallen thugs. The defeated men groaned in pain, unable to move. Chen's red eyes narrowed slightly as he muttered a single word, "Scram." Hearing that, the thugs panicked, scrambling to their feet and fleeing in terror. As they ran, a system notification appeared before Chen's eyes, stating that he had gained fear +1, panic +1, severe pain +1, despair +1, humiliation +1. Another notification followed, informing Chun that his negative emotion value had exceeded 10 for the first time. Space expansion permission unlocked. A third notification appeared, urging Chun to work hard to harvest, grow bigger, and become stronger. As the men disappeared into the distance, Chun glanced at the fading system window and smirked faintly. Harvest negative emotions. Interesting, he murmured. Moments later, the purple-haired girl he had saved looked up at him, her voice trembling with relief. She thanked him, saying she hadn't expected to meet him there. Chun extended a hand toward her, his tone softening slightly as he asked if she was hurt. He then handed his jacket to the girl, telling her to put it on. She looked at him, her expression gentle with gratitude, and thanked him sincerely. She explained that she had something urgent to do and needed to leave right away. Chun simply nodded and told her to be careful. After she left, the man in the colorful shirt grinned and stepped forward, teasingly calling Chun a hero for saving a beautiful woman. He introduced himself as Mu Chang and asked for Chen's name. Chen replied calmly, saying that he was the one who had arranged to meet Mu Chang. Hearing that, Mu Chang's eyes widened in surprise before he burst into laughter, calling it fate that they had run into each other. Then, striking a dramatic pose, Mu Chang shouted his code phrase, "Heavenly King covers Earth Tiger." Chen raised an eyebrow and looked at him with a straight face, replying, "You are 250. Mu Chang froze in confusion, completely dumbfounded. Just then, the system suddenly activated in Chen's mind. A glowing blue window appeared above Mu Chang's head, displaying detection of intense negative emotions. Dumbfounded +1, bewilderment +1, embarrassment +1. Chun was shocked to see this and stared at Mu Chang in awkward silence, the atmosphere turning strangely comical. Chen raised his hand playfully and shouted with a grin, jokingly saying, "Pagoda suppresses river demon." He told Mu Chang not to mind it, saying he was just making a little joke to lighten the mood. Hearing that, Mu Chang's face twisted in disbelief, his tone filled with both frustration and amusement as he shouted back, "Damn it, brother. That joke of yours. You're ruthless. Follow me." The scene then shifted to a quiet night outside a two-story house, its windows glowing warmly under the streetlight. Inside, Mu Chang handed Chen a wooden box. Inside were a pistol, several bullets, and a magazine neatly arranged. Mu Chang explained that it was a sturdy Russian-made gun, durable and reliable, but warned that there weren't many bullets, so he should use them sparingly. Chun inspected the weapon calmly, while Mu Chang continued with a grin, saying that since Chen's skills were impressive and he seemed like an interesting guy, he would offer it at a friendship price, considering it was making a new friend. Chen smiled faintly and replied, "Not bad. Thanks." As Mu Chang watched closely, he noted how skillfully Chen handled the gun, his movements smooth and precise. His sharp eyes narrowed as he muttered to himself that the man was clearly an expert. Since everything checked out, there was no problem. Then Chun turned slightly, his tone casual yet teasing. He asked Mu Chang with a smirk whether the gun came with a free suppressor, if there was a warranty card, and whether he could maybe throw in another box of bullets. Hearing that, Mu Chang's eyes widened in shock, completely caught off guard by the unexpected remark. Mu Chang's expression froze in disbelief. He shouted inwardly that it was already a friendship price and demanded to know if Chun even understood what that meant. Frustrated, he clenched his fists and gritted his teeth, thinking that people were paying double the price for this gun on the black market. Yet this guy still wanted a warranty and free extras. His anger spiked as he glared at Chun, his thoughts screaming that it felt like Chun was treating the deal as if he were buying home appliances. He almost wanted to yell for Chun to just rob him instead. At that moment, the system activated again in Chen's mind. Detection of intense negative emotions. Shock +1, heartache +1, speechless +1. Seeing this, Chen simply smiled and waved his hand casually. He told Mu Chang that if it wasn't possible, then never mind. He was only asking. He said he would stick to the original price and transferred the money immediately. Mu Chang stood there speechless as Chen calmly finalized the transaction. Now Chen's supplies and the gun were secured. It was time to get revenge. Outside, the scene shifted to a brightly lit building beneath the night sky, the moon glowing overhead. Inside, under a dazzling chandelier, a woman in a red dress stood silently by the window. Her long blonde hair flowed down her back as city lights reflected through the glass behind her. She was Lu Wanqing, wearing the red dress. She complained softly, asking why Chen had taken so long to arrive. She said her legs were tired from standing and nervously asked whether the thing he had mentioned earlier truly involved no risk. Chen smiled and pulled her close, his tone smooth and reassuring. He told her it was just a formality and that he adored her too much to ever deceive her. Hearing this, Lu Wanqing leaned back with a cigarette between her fingers, her expression turning sly. She thought to herself that Chun was just a gullible fool who had nearly sold his blood once just to buy her a handbag. She smirked, convinced that he was too infatuated to ever betray her. Then they went inside. In the room, Zhang Yang sat across from her, flanked by 2 bodyguards. He praised her confidence and said with a grin that her signature was beautiful. Lu Wanqing smiled faintly, unaware of the trap she had just walked into. Zhang Yang, wearing a cunning smile, watched as her signature appeared on the contract. Inwardly, he mocked her, thinking that she believed she was only signing as a guarantor, when in truth, once her name was written, the entire debt would belong to her. As she signed, the scheming man's thoughts grew darker. He thought that once she failed to repay the debt, she would have no choice but to pay with her body. He grinned through a puff of smoke, murmuring to himself with a sinister laugh that when she couldn't repay, that would be when his fun began. Across the room, she stood before Chun, unaware of his calm expression as he watched her. Inwardly, Chen smirked and told her silently to go ahead and sign the so-called indentured servitude contract. He thought that her greed would perfectly cover the final payment for his safe house. Everything went unexpectedly smoothly, and he quietly thanked Lu Wanqing in his mind for making things so easy. Later that night, Chen stood outside a newly constructed building beside the architect, who proudly gestured toward it. He assured Chen that everything inside was reinforced to 120% of military standards, complete with heat insulation, soundproofing, explosion resistance, and anti-drilling layers. He boasted that the house could even withstand several nuclear bombs. Chen inspected the structure and nodded in approval. With a faint smile, he commented that the quality was good. The man, wearing dark sunglasses, grinned widely and said Chen could come back anytime if he needed more work done. Afterward, Chen sat alone in his new home, placing a case on the table as the television played in the background. The news anchor's voice filled the room, reporting that due to unprecedented super-strong solar flare activity, the world was about to experience continuous extreme high-temperature weather on a global scale. The broadcast continued, warning that temperatures across many regions would soon break all historical records, urging every citizen to prepare for protection. As the reporter's voice echoed faintly in the background, Chen wrapped a cloth around the barrel of his gun, his grip tightening. He lifted the weapon and pressed it against his temple with a faint smile, whispering a single word. Finally, his crimson eyes sharpened with determination. The reflection of burning light danced within them as he turned toward the massive window, his expression calm and resolute. The golden-orange light from outside cast a fiery glow across his face as he muttered quietly, "It's here." Outside, the sky was engulfed in a blinding inferno. A colossal sun-like flare loomed over the city skyline, flooding the world in crimson light. Chen stood before it in silence, gun in hand, watching as the fiery apocalypse began to descend upon the world. The news reported that a super-strong solar flare had erupted. Because of this, the Earth's ionosphere was facing violent disturbances. Extreme high temperatures were appearing in many places around the world, and daytime temperatures were expected to rise to 45 degrees Celsius. Citizens were advised to take heat stroke prevention measures and avoid going outside at noon unless it was necessary. Chen stood by the window, sweat running down his face. He looked outside and thought that the temperature was starting to rise, but this was only the beginning. The city streets were bathed in strong sunlight, and heat shimmered between the tall buildings. On the other side of the building, at home, a woman leaned against the balcony, already exhausted. She exclaimed that it was unbelievably hot, even early in the morning. Sweat dripped from her body as she complained that the weather was really killing her and wondered how long this high temperature would last. Meanwhile, outside the residential neighborhood, a vendor shouted to the neighbors that the weather was deadly. He said he had heard that the temperature would keep rising next week. He warned everyone about a supply shortage. He announced loudly that water and electricity would soon be rationed. He told people that if they did not stock up now, they would not even have mineral water to drink later. He urged everyone to hurry, saying this was his last batch of goods. As he wiped the sweat from his face, he thought to himself that this heat wave was like money coming straight to his door. He believed he would be letting himself down if he did not use this chance to make a fortune. Nearby, a woman looked at the melons and asked the boss if he could sell them cheaper because they were too expensive. The vendor stared at the woman with wide eyes and blurted out, "You're a beauty." He smiled and said that the melon was very sweet and asked if they wanted him to cut one for them to taste. He added that if they bought two, he would give them a 20% discount and even throw in a pack of tissues for free. The women looked at each other. One of them politely refused and said they would just buy one. The vendor kept pushing and told them to buy more and stock up. He said the weather was so hot that there might not be any left for sale tomorrow. On the other hand, an old man pointed at the water and asked the boss to make it cheaper too. The vendor immediately refused. He shouted that it was a small business and that there was absolutely no bargaining. Nearby, Chin watched silently. He frowned and clicked his tongue, thinking about Liatafu, the vendor. He remembered that in his past life, when the weather became so hot, he had also come to Liatafu's supermarket to buy supplies just like everyone else. He saw packets of chips lying on the ground. When he bent down to pick up an item that had fallen, Liatafu suddenly grabbed him by the collar and shouted loudly, calling everyone to look. He accused Chun of stealing and claimed he had caught him red-handed. Chun quickly explained that he did not steal anything. He said he had only seen it fall on the ground and wanted to pick it up and put it back. However, Liatafu sneered and mocked him, asking if he was really that kind-hearted. He looked at Chin's worn clothes and said his hands were not clean. He demanded money and threatened to send him to the police station if he did not pay. People around them began whispering. Someone mocked that at such a young age he still chose to steal. Another person said they did not know how his parents had taught him. Someone else added that since he was not speaking, it must mean he had admitted it. However, Chun refused the allegation again and again, telling everyone that he did not steal anything. At that moment, no one believed him. In the present, Chun stopped in front of them, his face calm but his eyes cold. He looked at the scene and then turned his head slightly, watching Liatafu closely. After that, he looked around inside the shop and saw a packet of onion potato chips displayed on the shelf, marked at 50 yen per pack under a manager's recommendation. Chun smiled and calmly asked Boss Liatafu whether his chips were made of gold or if they could prevent heat stroke, questioning why they were sold at such a high price. Boss Liatafu's face stiffened. Sweat rolled down his face as he glared at him, anger clearly rising. At that moment, a strange panel appeared, showing that strong negative emotion had been detected. Boss Liatafu suddenly shouted and told him to get lost. He warned Chin not to touch the chips if he could not afford them, and asked if he could even pay if he broke them. Another panel flashed, showing even stronger negative emotion, this time full of irritation. The atmosphere around them grew tense as Boss Liatafu's anger continued to build. Chin smiled faintly and warned Boss Liatafu that hoarding so many goods might make it hard for him to sleep at night. He told him to be careful or someone might steal from him. Boss Liatafu froze for a moment, then exploded in anger. He shouted, asking who the young man thought he was cursing. He yelled that he would beat him up and mocked him, saying the heat must have made him crazy. Chin calmly told Boss Liatafu to calm down. He then asked if Boss Liatafu had been suffering from insomnia, strange dreams, weak knees, or night sweats recently. Boss Liatafu was stunned. After hesitating, he admitted that it was true, at least a little. Chun continued, suggesting that there might be a Finchu problem with Boss Liatafu's warehouse. Boss Liatafu's eyes widened. He sucked in a breath and muttered that he knew it. Chun clicked his tongue and said that he already knew it. He stepped closer and began examining Boss Liatafu's face. He said that Boss Liatafu's intang looked dark. Boss Liatafu suddenly felt dizzy as his vision blurred. His eyes widened as he shouted that his eyes could not focus. Chin watched calmly and said that this was a typical deficiency. Boss Liatafu completely lost his temper. He shouted that the young man was the one with the problem and cursed his whole family, telling him to get out. Chen remained calm. He warned boss Liadafu to take care of his health, saying that too much anger harmed the body, especially for someone like him. He clicked his tongue and said that if boss Liadafu did not pay attention to it, he might die young. As he spoke, he casually flicked a coin into the air and turned away. Boss Liadafu staggered back, clutching his head in fury. At that moment, a panel appeared, showing a massive surge of negative emotion filled with intense anger. Sometime later, as night fell, Chen stood alone in front of Liadafu's store. In his heart, he thought about his past life. He remembered how he had swallowed his anger and let others push him around. In this life, he decided he would take everything back with interest. He then recalled that he could use spatial expansion once enough emotions were gathered. He thought that the emotions contributed by Liadafu were just right to use. A system panel appeared. It showed that 20 points of negative emotion had been consumed. Another notification followed, announcing that the storage space had expanded by 200 cubic meters. A strange, buzzing sound echoed as dark energy gathered in his hand. Chen looked down at his palm, then slowly raised his head. A faint smile appeared on his face as his eyes glowed with calm confidence. After that, the scene shifted to the next day. Liadafu happily went back to open his store. However, when he went inside, Liadafu froze in place. Sweat ran down his face as he stared ahead in shock. He opened his mouth trying to speak, but no words came out. The shelves inside the store, all the racks, were empty. The entire storage area had been cleared in silence, leaving nothing behind. He screamed in rage, demanding to know where his goods had gone. He shouted, asking who did it and who dared to steal from him. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Chen sat calmly in a chair, watching through a monitor screen as Liadafu grabbed his head and roared in anger. Liadafu lost control and shouted in anger. He yelled, asking who did it and who stole all his stock. He screamed for the person to get out immediately. In the next moment, Liadafu slipped. His body lost balance, and he fell hard onto the ground. He screamed loudly as he crashed down. Liadafu sat on the floor holding his face in pain and despair. Behind him, people gathered and whispered among themselves. Someone said all the goods were gone in just one night. Another person wondered if Liadafu had staged this himself to raise prices. Someone else worried that the supermarket was empty and asked what they would do next. Nearby, two women talked in low voices. One said she had heard that someone saw a dark shadow floating around last night. The other woman looked shocked and asked if that was really true. Liadafu's face twisted in shock. He shouted in disbelief, saying there was no way the place was haunted. At the same time, system panels appeared silently. Strong negative emotion was detected. From within the crowd, Chen watched calmly. He observed Liadafu and thought that his emotional output was still quite stable. Chen casually took out a chip and ate it while standing there. His expression remained relaxed. Inside his mind, Chen decided to stir things up a little more. He planned to add fuel to the fire and give Liadafu a small thrill. Chen walked forward while holding a bag of chips. He smiled slightly and said that it smelled really good. Liadafu, who was still kneeling on the ground, suddenly noticed him. His eyes locked onto the bag in Chen's hand, and he stared at it without blinking. He remembered that this packaging was his stock. He also remembered that yesterday Chen was the one who asked if his chips were made of gold or if they could prevent heat stroke to be sold at such a high price. He also warned that hoarding so many treasures might make it hard to sleep at night and that he should watch out for thieves. Liadafu suddenly lunged forward and grabbed Chen by the collar. His face twisted with anger as he shouted, demanding to know where Chen got those chips. He accused Chen of stealing his goods and still acting arrogant. Chen did not panic. He calmly looked at Liadafu and told him that getting physical was no fun. He asked Liadafu if he had any evidence. Chen continued in a steady tone. He said that making accusations without proof meant Liadafu would have to take responsibility. Then Chen glanced around the supermarket and spoke again. He said the place was really clean, not even a single chip left behind. With a faint smile, he suggested giving Liadafu the remaining half bag of chips. Liadafu shouted angrily at Chen. He accused him of cursing him yesterday. He said that now all the goods were gone, yet Chen was still eating chips there. He yelled that if Chen did not steal them, then who did? In his heart, Liadafu thought that even if Chen was not the thief, he could still squeeze something out of him to cover his losses. At that moment, a red system panel appeared. Strong negative emotion was detected. Liadafu's anger surged sharply. Chen remained calm. He asked everyone to judge for themselves. He said that Boss Li lost his own stock and now wanted to blame him for it. People in the crowd began to talk. Someone said that other places sold these chips too. Another person pointed out that Liadafu complained yesterday that the chips were expensive and today the supermarket was completely empty. It felt too coincidental. Liadafu stared at Chun in disbelief. Inside his mind, he wondered how this weak-looking kid had suddenly become so tough. Chun looked straight at Liadafu and spoke calmly. He said that if Boss Lee did not believe him, he could search his house. Chun promised that if any items from the supermarket were found there, he would pay 10 times the value. But if nothing was found, then the backup generator at Boss Lee's back door would belong to him. Liadafu sneered and agreed loudly. He told Chun to let them search and said they would see how long Chun could keep pretending. The two stared at each other closely, neither backing down. Liadafu then shouted to the crowd. He said it would be better if they found the stolen goods. If not, he mocked Chun and said that wanting the generator was nothing but a dream. The crowd stood behind them, watching the confrontation in tense silence as the situation reached a breaking point. After that, the group entered Chin's house and everyone froze in place. Someone exclaimed in shock that Chin's house was extremely luxurious. Another person muttered that he really had been hiding his true strength. In their minds, they all wondered when this kid had become so rich. Liadafu looked up and raised his hands toward the crystal chandelier on the ceiling. His eyes widened in disbelief. He moved around the room and stopped in front of the wardrobe. When he saw the expensive clothes hanging neatly inside, his mouth fell open. Then the refrigerator door was opened. Inside were neatly arranged drinks, jars of food, cakes, and fresh meat. Everything looked carefully stored and untouched. Next to it, a safe was revealed. When it was opened, stacks of gold bars were seen inside, shining brightly. Liadafu leaned closer and peeked inside, his face turning pale. Cold sweat rolled down his face as shock completely took over. Chin stood calmly with his arms crossed and looked at Boss Lee. With a faint smile, he asked if Boss Lee had searched enough and whether he wanted to pry open the floorboards as well. Boss Lee's face stiffened. Cold sweat poured down as panic took over. He stammered that there was no need and said he would go ask other places instead. As he spoke, he turned around and hurried toward the exit, looking completely flustered. Just as Boss Lee tried to escape, Chin suddenly spoke up and told him not to go yet. He reminded Boss Lee about the generator they had agreed on. Chin reached out and grabbed Boss Lee by the collar, stopping him in his tracks. Boss Lee froze. On the spot, his face pale and his body stiff, unable to move. Everyone present had clearly heard the agreement. Chin looked at Boss Lee and calmly asked if he was really planning to go back on his word. Boss Lee immediately pretended to be confused. He laughed awkwardly and said he had no idea what generator Chin was talking about. He told Chin to calm down and claimed there was no need to make things so ugly. Chin did not smile. He coldly reminded Boss Lee that when Boss Lee framed him before, he never once talked about stepping back or calming down. The people around them watched in silence. Someone muttered that they could not understand how a person like this could refuse to keep his word. Another voice followed, saying that Boss Lee had no integrity at all and that it was only right for someone like him to be taken advantage of. Boss Lee stood there stiffly, his face twisted, completely exposed in front of everyone. Boss Lee finally lost his temper. He shouted at Chun, saying that he had already shown him respect, but Chin still refused to back down. Before Boss Lee could react, Chin moved. He grabbed Boss Lee's hand and twisted it hard. A sharp cracking sound rang out as pain shot through Boss Lee's arm. Boss Lee screamed loudly, clutching his hand in agony. His face twisted in pain as his body bent forward, unable to resist. He shouted that he would move it, saying he would move the generator right away. Chin looked at him coldly and told him to hurry. He warned that once the temperature rose later, it would be impossible to go outside. He calmly reminded Boss Lee that power would be rationed in a few days, and without a generator, Liadafu would have no way to cope. A system notification appeared at once. Strong negative emotions were detected. Humiliation surged, pain increased sharply, and fear spiked even higher. Chin turned away calmly, standing straight as if nothing had happened. The room fell silent, and no one dared to speak. Just then, a phone suddenly rang on the table. The caller's name on the screen was Lu Wanqing. As soon as the call connected, Lu Wanqing spoke anxiously. She told Chun that for the past 2 days, a few people had been following her. From their behavior, they looked like debt collectors. Chun frowned slightly as he listened. Lu Wanqing sounded upset and confused. She asked him if he had not said that she was only signing papers. She did not understand why those people were now stalking her. Lu Wanqing raised her voice angrily, demanding that Chen tell her the truth. She asked why the people from the Dahal gang were looking for her and whether he had lied to her. Chen looked at his phone and replied softly, asking why she never trusted him. He said he had already paid so much for her sake. He continued walking slowly while speaking, telling her that he had poured his heart out and would never lie. Hearing her accuse him, he said, made him feel very sad. As the call continued, Chen's expression turned cold. In his mind, he thought that the group from the Dahal gang was even more impatient than he had expected. Chen spoke into the phone while standing in front of the refrigerator, calmly asking whether the people from the Dahal gang knew where Lu Wanqing lived yet and what they had said to her. Lu Wanqing answered quickly. She said they did not know her address. She had taken small roads and managed to shake them off. Her tone turned sharp as she demanded to know what was really going on and warned Chen not to play tricks on her. Chen leaned against the wall, listening quietly. After a short pause, he spoke again in a steady voice, telling her not to overthink it and suggesting she might have mistaken someone else for them. He then sat quietly at the table. In front of him was a plate of food, with his phone lying on the surface. On the phone screen, Lu Wanqing suddenly froze. Her eyes widened as she noticed the food on the table. She asked Chen how he could still have things like that. Chen calmly lifted a can of soda and took a sip, replying casually that it was not just those things. He still had plenty in stock. On the screen, Lu Wanqing looked at him in surprise and asked if he really had a lot. As she lay on the sofa holding her phone, her thoughts raced. The heat wave had lasted for many days. Supplies were now only available to the rich. She could not understand where he got so much food from. A thought crossed her mind. Maybe he had really become rich. Chen spoke casually while drinking, saying that food like this tasted best when the weather was hot. He picked up his fork, took a piece of salmon, and ate it calmly without any hurry. On the other end, Lu Wanqing stared at the screen in shock. Her eyes widened as she recognized the food. She could hardly believe it was salmon. Her heart beat faster. She hugged her phone tightly and shouted in her mind that she really wanted to eat it, too. Chen spoke softly through the phone, asking Lu Wanqing if she had enough food over there. Lu Wanqing continued in a low voice, saying she was really scared living alone. She felt like those people were still nearby and could show up at any time, so she asked Chen if she could stay at his place for a few days. She lay on the sofa holding her phone close, her voice softening as she added that she could keep him company. Chen picked up another piece of salmon. Inside his mind, he mocked quietly, thinking that Lu Wanqing had fallen for it too easily. He spoke into the phone in a calm tone, saying the weather would only get hotter later and it would be inconvenient for her to go outside. He then reminded her of what she used to say before, that a girl should not casually give her address to others, acting mysterious and never letting him visit. After that, Chen spoke again, telling her to send him the address, and he would pick her up later tonight when it cooled down. On the other side, Lu Wanqing smiled. She said that was all in the past. The situation was special now, and since he was her boyfriend, he should protect her. She added that if he did not protect her, then who would? As she spoke, she sent him her address and leaned back on the sofa, holding her phone with a relaxed expression. Chen looked at his phone and spoke calmly, telling her to wait obediently at home and make sure not to run around. On the other side, Lu Wanqing lay on the sofa with her legs raised, holding her phone. In her heart, she thought that a simp was still a simp, easily moved by a little sweetness. Chen lowered his gaze. Dark thoughts surfaced in his mind. He thought about how she used to act proud and distant, never even letting him enter her community. Now she had willingly sent her apartment number just for a bite of food. Just as he was thinking, someone suddenly knocked at his door. Outside, a woman stood with a child beside her. She raised her hand and called out, asking Chen to open the door. Chen walked toward the entrance and stopped in front of it. He opened the door slightly and looked outside, then asked with a calm smile, "Auntie Wang, is something wrong?" Auntie Wang smiled as she spoke. She said Chen's place felt cool, her air conditioner was broken, and the child could not endure the heat. They were all neighbors and should help each other, she insisted, asking to come inside and stay for a while. Chen looked at her quietly, then spoke coldly. He reminded her of the past. When he was little, he and his mother picked up plastic bottles downstairs. Back then, Annie Wong pointed at them, called them poor beggars, and even told security to chase them away. He asked her if she remembered him now. Annie Wong's face changed. She suddenly shouted angrily and lashed out, pointing at Chun and yelling that it was all from many years ago, her voice sharp and impatient. She accused Chun of holding a grudge and shouted that he had no human touch at all. Chun responded calmly, almost casually. "That's fine," he said. "I might not have any human touch, but I do have air conditioning." Auntie Wong turned away in rage, her anger bursting out completely. She suddenly cursed him loudly, shouting that he was heartless and saying he deserved it when his parents died early. As she slammed her hand against the door, a system notification appeared. Strong negative emotion detected. Anger increased sharply. After that, Chun turned away from the door and walked back into the room. On the table, his phone lay beside a SIM card. Chun picked it up and inserted the new SIM into the phone, holding it in one hand. He called the Dahal gang leader. Chun held the phone to his ear and spoke in a low voice. He said that he knew Lu Wanqing's address. He told the Dahal gang that he had already sent it over and that she lived alone, making her very easy to find. After the call ended, Chun stood quietly on the balcony. Sunlight fell across the room behind him. He looked down and softly spoke her name, Lu Wanqing. The show, he thought, had begun. Lu Wanqing stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself. A satisfied smile appeared on her face. She thought that soon she would be able to move into Chen's air-conditioned room. In her mind, she imagined Chun kneeling in front of her and believed that only this kind of easy and carefree life was worthy of her. She sat comfortably, enjoying the cool air, looking relaxed and confident. Later, she lay on the bed and lit a cigarette, holding it lightly between her fingers. Her expression was calm, as if everything was already under her control. Suddenly, a knock sounded at the door. Lu Wanqing turned her head in surprise and got up. She walked to the door and opened it slightly. With a smile, she spoke casually, asking why he had arrived so early. Inside her heart, she mocked silently, thinking that he was truly eager and easy to manipulate. But Lu Wanqing's eyes widened in shock. Fear spread across her face as she realized something was wrong. 3 men stood in front of her. The man in the middle was Zhang Yang. He stepped forward, blocking her path. She looked at them in panic and asked how they knew where she lived. Zhang slapped her aside and smiled coldly. He told her that the money she owed to the Dahal gang had to be paid back today. Hearing that, Lu Wanqing trembled. She tried to argue and said that the money was not hers. She shouted that Chun had borrowed it and tricked her into signing. She told them to go find him instead. Zhang then leaned closer, holding the contract in his hand. He said the agreement was clear. Whoever signed it had to pay. He told her to stop talking nonsense. Hearing that, Lu Wanqing lost her balance and fell to the floor. Fear and regret filled her face. Zhang straightened up and gave an order. He told his men to search the place and take everything valuable. The 2 men behind him moved forward, their eyes cold as they began to carry out the order. One of the men lifted a wooden plank and smashed the furniture while searching the room. Drawers were pulled open and things were thrown everywhere. Lu Wanqing shouted in panic. She told them to stop rummaging and said she was calling Chun. She claimed he would come right away and told them to go look for him instead. The men ignored her. They opened her bags and poured everything out. Jewelry scattered across the table, but Zhang only glanced at it with disappointment. He said these things were just scraps and not even enough to cover the interest. Lu Wanqing stood frozen, her face pale with fear. She realized there was nothing valuable enough to satisfy them. The man sat down lazily on the sofa and picked up one of the bags. He said they had come all this way in the hot weather and could not leave empty-handed. He lifted the bag and looked at it coldly, repeating that these scraps were still not enough. Lu Wanqing's legs weakened. She backed away and shouted desperately, telling them not to come closer. She cried that the money was with Chun and begged them to go find him instead. Zhang closed in on her. Her voice trembled as fear completely took over. Zhang's eyes narrowed as he looked down at Lu Wanqing. A cold smile slowly formed on his face. Lu Wanqing clenched her fists and spoke in a hurry. She said that Chun had many supplies and would be coming to pick her up soon. She told them to wait for him and ask him for the money instead. She quickly took out her phone and tried to call Chun. The call did not go through. A cold voice from the phone said that the number she had dialed was currently unavailable. Lu Wanqing froze. She stared at the screen in disbelief and tried again. The same message played once more. Her hands began to shake. Sweat ran down her face as fear filled her eyes. She looked up and said weakly that no one was answering. The room grew silent. Zhang, standing in front of her, did not move. Their shadows slowly closed in as her last hope faded away. Lu Wanqing stared in disbelief. Her eyes trembled as she wondered how this could be happening. She hurriedly tried to calm everyone. She said, "Chen must be busy," and did not hear the phone ring. She forced a nervous smile and said she would call him again right away. But before she could react, Zhang suddenly lashed out. He threw her phone and cursed her harshly, calling her stupid. He said Chen had already sold her out. He shouted that Chen never planned to repay the money from the start and had only tricked her into signing. Hearing this, Lu Wanqing froze. Her face turned pale as she muttered in shock, unable to understand what she was hearing. Zhang grabbed her hair roughly and pulled her toward him. She screamed and told him to let go. Tears filled her eyes as she struggled. She shouted that they should go find Chun instead. She cried that only Chun had the things they wanted and begged him to release her. A sharp scream filled the room as Lu Wanqing was dragged down to the floor. She cried out in pain and fear while the men stood around her. The door burst closed with a loud crash as Zhang forced Lu Wanqing inside. At the same moment, her phone slipped from her hand and fell to the ground. The screen shattered as it hit the floor. Broken sounds echoed while her cries continued. Her screams filled the air. She tried to speak, but only broken words came out. Fear overwhelmed her as her screams grew louder. Elsewhere, Chen sat calmly in a quiet room. He leaned back in his chair, holding a glass of red wine. His phone lay on the table nearby, glowing softly. His expression remained relaxed and cold, as if everything was going exactly as planned. He lifted the glass slightly and looked ahead with a faint smile. In his mind, he addressed her calmly. He wished Lu Wanqing a good taste of the apocalypse passion. Sometime later, Lu Wanqing's quiet apartment building stood under the city lights. One window was lit while the rest remained dark. Inside the room, Zhang sat up while dressing, his back facing forward. Not far away, Lu Wanqing curled up on the bed. She hugged her knees tightly, her face buried near her hands. Tears fell as she sobbed again and again. Zhang then grabbed a cup from the table. The cup hit the surface with a hard sound. Zhang stepped closer and grabbed Lu Wanqing by the chin, forcing her to look up. He asked what good things were at Chen's place and told her to say it again. With tears streaming down her face and fear in her eyes, Lu Wanqing answered in a broken voice. She said there was air conditioning, cold drinks, and lots of food. She weakly whispered that his home had everything. Hearing that, Zhang's eyes narrowed as he looked down at her. Lu Wanqing told him to go find Chun, saying that he was the person they should be looking for. Tears streamed down her face as she cried and said that she really had nothing left. After getting all the information, Zhang threw Lu Wanqing onto the bed, her body curling up from the impact. He stood upright, thinking that if there was air conditioning and supplies, then he had caught a big fish this time. He smiled and turned to his men, telling them it was time to go. They left, slamming Lu Wanqing's door shut and leaving broken glass scattered on the floor. Lu Wanqing sat alone on the bed, covering her mouth as tears fell. She said that Chun had tricked her. Her eyes were filled with hatred as she shouted that he would die a horrible death.